Hey guys, Hartwin here, and today I'm going to be showing you a guide on Discipline Priest offensive cooldown usage. Since Priests are still the most offensive healer in WoW, I think it's important to have a good idea on how to effectively utilize their cooldowns as offensive tools. Most of Discipline's offense comes from using base spells like Dispel Magic and their damage quick nukes, but offensive cooldowns are just as important. In this video, I'm going to be explaining how to use 5 different spells, which I have displayed for you. First, I'm going to take a look at Inner Focus and how it can be used as one of your most powerful offensive tools in PvP. Then I'm going to take a look at Psychic Scream, Power Infusion, Pain Suppression, and Shadow Fiend, some of which can be self-explanatory. Now, I hate to keep my audience waiting in suspense, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. The first cooldown that I want to talk about is going to be Inner Focus, and as of patch 4.1, Strength of Soul gives priests a 5-second silence immunity when casting Inner Focus. One mistake I see a lot of priests making is that they only use Strength of Soul as a healing tool, and of course primarily the spell is a healing tool, but it also has a lot of value on other spells like Mana Burn. Just because you cast Inner Focus doesn't mean you have to use heals just because it affects heals. You can also use it just to get free cast off, kind of like a mini aura mastery. Now, for example, in this clip I'm going to be going for a Mana Burn on a paladin who's stuck in a bad position. One thing that the opposing team's warrior could easily do is pummel me. So instead of eating a pummel or even trying to fake it, I choose to use my Inner Focus to get off a few quick Mana Burns when both the warrior and paladin wouldn't expect it. Now you can see that I did use my Inner Focus to get off a few Mana Burns on the paladin, and you can also see that my Mana Burns did not consume the Inner Focus buff. The reason for this is because Inner Focus is only consumed on certain healing spells. Therefore, when you cast heals with Inner Focus, the buff will come off immediately, but when you cast anything that doesn't affect Inner Focus, such as Mana Burn, you won't consume the buff, and it's going to stay on a 45-second cooldown. So one thing I do to keep the cooldown running is a simple macro. Right here is the simple macro that I just copy and pasted right into here that I use for Inner Focus on spells like Mana Burn. Basically what the macro does is when I press it, it casts Inner Focus, and when I press it the second time, it cancels the buff. So the macro allows you to put Inner Focus back on cooldown so you can keep using it again to get the silence immunity. The reason you're able to use Inner Focus offensively like this is because it's on a relatively short cooldown. 45-second cooldown isn't too long of a cooldown, but it's also not too short of a cooldown. However, if you do use it offensively and let the buff sit on you without canceling it, the cooldown's going to be longer than it should be, which sort of nullifies the whole purpose of using it offensively. If you're not consuming the buff after using it, it's going to be sitting on cooldown, making you able to use the immunities less often. Next up, we've got one of the most basic and deadly offensive cooldowns. Psychic Scream, or just simply Fear, is the priest's most effective form of offense when used correctly. Psychic Scream is an 8-second crowd control on a 27-second cooldown for all disciplined priests, because they don't get the shadow talent that is in the shadow tree, which gives time off the cooldown. Crowd control itself is probably the most essential game mechanic in WoW. Most teams, other than Cleave, need crowd control to pressure the opposing team and gain momentum in a fight. The fact that crowd control inhibits the control of a character is absolutely huge. Now, the reason that Psychic Scream can be set apart from other forms of crowd control is because it's capable of controlling more than just one enemy. If you fear on top of a large group, you're bound to hit more than just one person. And if you fear more than one enemy, it can be extremely effective in forcing enemies' cooldowns. Because if you isolate just one member of the opposing team, it's going to be an uneven fight. It might be 2v1, 3v1, anything like that. You're going to have numbers over the other team, and it's going to give you a lot of momentum. Using Psychic Scream as a form of crowd control is its most basic use, and in this clip you'll see that my warrior is setting up a great crowd control chain by charging the shaman. So while the shaman is stunned, I can walk over to him and land a big fear so we can get this kill on the rogue. Right there at the end you can see that the shaman did end up trinketing my fear, and we ended up killing the rogue anyway. But what's important to note is that the shaman trinketed the fear, and that's really the main purpose of using fear as a crowd control. You're not necessarily going to kill someone every time you get someone in a CC chain. You're looking mainly to force cooldowns, and if you do kill someone, that's great. One other use for Psychic Scream is to act as an interrupt. Interrupts can go for interrupting spells or simply disallowing another player to cast globals that will benefit them. In this clip, my warrior is doing heavy damage to the enemy priest, and since I can't reliably fear the warrior, I decided to use my fear on the priest so he can't use his globals to heal himself. This causes him to fall behind a little bit and get us a little bit more pressure in the fight. Another quick thing to look at is that right here the priest actually uses his Will of the Forsaken to get my fear. Even though my warrior's sitting on him and he could just break him out of the fear, this priest decides to use his Will of the Forsaken to get out of the fear. This is going to put his trinket on cooldown, and later on we can probably get a good swap to him and get a kill. The next spell that I'm going to be looking at is Pain Suppression. Now at first you might be thinking that Pain Suppression is mainly a defensive cooldown. And yes, overall Pain Suppression is a defensive cooldown, but it can also be used offensively on the other team. By using Pain Suppression to reduce damage, you can worry less about healing and switch over to being offensive toward the other team. In this clip, I decided to use my Pain Suppression on my warrior because the opposing team's priest is in a bit of trouble here. He's kind of low health, and if I PS my warrior, we can go even more aggressive to put him further behind. So by using Pain Suppression on my warrior, I can go heavy with dispels, making sure I get his shields off, as well as any other buffs that he might have. I can also take the time to do a little bit of damage here too. Power Infusion is another spell that can be used both defensively and offensively. Now, I see a lot of priests use their Power Infusion only for when they fall behind on healing themselves, and it can be a real waste if most teams choose to only go on your teammates. When possible, I try to use Power Infusion offensively because I think it's extremely beneficial to have a faster global and cast time than other players. A faster global cooldown allows you to spell much quicker than you would normally be able to, and global cooldowns kind of slow WoW down a lot. Sometimes I think I'm able to act a lot faster than the game will actually let me play. For example, back in Wrath when priests were able to get a lot of haste, things were very quick and you were able to react very quickly to certain things. You were able to quickly dispel your teammates and have faster cast times, but now since priests need a lot of spirit, you're not really able to get any haste, so everything's really slowed down a lot since Wrath. Power Infusion is best used offensively when you're able to get off a lot of free casts from the enemy. Now, my own preference is to use Power Infusion on mana burns and dispels. In this clip, I pop my PI and I get some quick burns off on the priest. Although he line of sights my second mana burn, Power Infusion allows me to get a second mana burn when my warrior puts him in a throwdown. Alright guys, it's time to talk about the last offensive cooldown. Shadow Fiend is by far the most offense that you will be able to generate as a discipline priest. Right now, pets do an absurd amount of damage, and Shadow Fiend is included. Shadow Fiend is extremely important to use correctly because it can either be a great way to generate offense or be completely wasted and do nothing. There have been times where I've seen Shadow Fiend crit up to around 10k, and occasionally it does even more than 10k crits. So the best time to use Shadow Fiend is when you know you're able to get a lot of benefit without it getting crowd controlled or kited. This is going to make your Shadow Fiend give you back a lot of mana, as well as doing a lot of damage to the enemy. One thing I like to do with my Shadow Fiend is use Fear Ward on it to avoid having it get feared by warriors and sometimes priests and warlocks. When warriors fear Shadow Fiends, you can't dispel it because it's counted as a physical debuff instead of magic. Instead of using a Shadow Fiend and having it go to waste from a warrior fear, using a Fear Ward can help your Shadow Fiend stay out and attack the other team to do a lot of damage. In this clip, the opposing warrior has just popped his shield wall, and it's about to run out, and he's also still at low health. Since the shield wall is about to fade, I want to pop my Shadow Fiend to generate a little more pressure and hopefully land a kill. The Paladin's having trouble right now keeping up, so if I pop my Shadow Fiend, maybe I'll get some cooldowns from the Paladin, and we might possibly kill the warrior here. So with the possibility of the warrior fearing my Shadow Fiend, I decided to throw a Fear Ward on it so it can do as much damage as possible and we can try to go for the kill. Alright guys, that's all I have on this guide for Discipline offensive cooldowns. I plan on making a follow-up video that will highlight Discipline defensive cooldowns. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to ask me, and before I sign off, I'd like to give a special thanks to Divine and Arkin, and thanks for watching.